My name is Sam. I'm City Manager for the City of Joplin. I wanted to welcome you all here this afternoon. I see several familiar faces in the room who are probably more subject matter experts in the topic of volunteer management than I am. So I'm going to keep my opening comments short and let you learn from the experts in the group. We've got a great panel of experts here, I think, to talk about managing volunteers. To beg your forgiveness, I'm going to share a little bit of a personal story that kind of relates to the topic. But if you take a look, this is my living room about 2 or 3 weeks after our tornado here in Joplin. You'll notice the lack of furniture. Actually, let me point out my brother-in-law. That's my brother-in-law, Chris, and this is his church group who came down. He actually came down the day after the tornado and just had nothing to do that summer, so he volunteered, which I thought was fantastic. And then he had such a good time, he invited his church group to come down to it, which was great. So there's a sparsity of furniture in that room because this is where I was staying until 2 days prior to the tornado. So my apartment was right up in that little corner tucked away on the first floor. So we had actually closed on our house the Friday before the tornado, had most of our stuff still in the apartment and in the storage. So we had to order some of these things. But actually, fortunately, none of our stuff really got damaged. We lost an ice cream scoop and a bath mat out of the whole order. Yeah, so it was interesting. But I remember at noon the Monday after the tornado knocking on my city manager's office door and saying, hey, I need to go over to my apartment. I think it got hit, but my wife wanted her jewelry box and all of our kids' artwork and Social Security documents and all that other stuff. So he's like, sure, go over. So I had to navigate some of the debris that was in the way. There's actually, you can't see it in the picture, but there's a car and a dumpster right over there in that corner. So it's interesting to think about some of the what ifs. If I had still stayed in that apartment, actually we weren't supposed to close on our house until Memorial Day weekend, which is the following. So another interesting story about how we ended up. I'll shut up and I'll share that with you afterward if you're interested in it. But this is the situation you're going to face if you have a disaster that hits your community. The volunteers are going to come hard, they're going to come fast, and they're going to come quickly, and they're going to want to be put to work really quickly. So how do you do that as a community and organization? That's where the experts come in. So I wanted to introduce the panelists here this afternoon. I'm going to start with Mack Dighton. He was the volunteer coordinator for Greensburg tornado. Amanda Mitchell, who is with Freeman Health Systems right now, but she worked as the volunteer coordinator for Rebuild Joplin, which was an outstanding organization that actually stood up in Joplin after the event. Bruce Bailey with AmeriCorps St. Louis, he's the executive director. Fantastic. He's got a good presentation. I see lots of AmeriCorps shirts in the room. In the back is actually, I don't want to steal everybody's thunder, but basically a piece of plywood that we had several thousand volunteers sign who came through Joplin and through the Volunteer Reception Center. And then Marty McKnight with Valonia, Arkansas, kind of worked with a lot of the faith-based organizations post-tornado in 2014. So I wanted to introduce the panelists, and we're going to go, I think, in chronological order. So we'll start with Matt. I've asked them to kind of give you a 5-minute overview. Really quickly, guys, I'm sorry, but I want to make sure that we have as much time available for questions, because what I want to make sure you guys walk out of here with is at least 1 or 2 tips from each of the panelists to take back to your communities with you, because that's what we're here for. We're not here to talk about ourselves. We're here to talk about our experiences and some of the challenges, but some of the key takeaways that we had in working with volunteers that you guys in turn can take back to your communities. So I'll probably walk around the room a little bit. If you guys want to go and grab a seat, we'll open up here with Matt. And if you have questions along the way, again, kind of raise your hand, and I'll come around with the mic. We have a stationary mic here that we can share with you guys. So Mack Dighton, we're going to get started with you, sir. Thank you.
All right. Okay, I spit a lot, so be careful in the front row. My name is Mack Dighton. I grew up in Greensburg. I moved away. I ended up living down in Waco, Texas for a while. And I needed I got in the bar and restaurant business. And prior to that, I was in public administration, and I worked for a company you never heard of called Caterpillar. And I got to the point in my life where I sold out of all my investments and got out of the crazy business of being in a bar and restaurant business. Anybody ever owned a bar before? Don't ever do it. It was a lot of fun. Anyway, I got to go to Willie Nelson's birthday party. It's all true what they do down there. So anyway, I came back to Greensburg. My mom had dementia. My dad didn't know how to handle it. So I said, hey, I'll come home for a couple of months and help you out. And so I turned around and I got caught in a trap with my parents. And unfortunately, we lost a 3-year-old in a very tragic pool accident in Florida. So I had to drive my parents in a motorhome cross country. My mom's dementia increased, and 3 days after the funeral, my dad was diagnosed with full-blown lung cancer and died 8 months later. So I'm taking care of my mom. I'm in the basement sorting stuff out because she can't come down the stairs no more, which each kid's supposed to get, see. Those boxes survived. The EF5 tornado was just a few months later, and the insurance company made us a lot of money. So I ended up trying to figure out what to do. That night was just awful. And so I ended up thinking about going back to Texas. Because my mom told me when I bid her goodbye, they took her to a rest home in Oklahoma. She said, you get the hell out of here. I said, I think I'm going to stay. And some friends of mine saw me walking downtown, and they kept running up to me, and they were going, are you staying or are you going? I had to stop and look at these people and say, I'm going to stay with you guys, and I'm going to build homes, not houses, because there's a difference between a house and a home. 75 of them. Through the faith-based entities, we had a self-help housing program. Mennonite Housing came in. And for any of you that volunteered in Greensburg, I need to say thank you, because without the volunteers, Greensburg wouldn't be where it is today. The volunteers are so under-marketed. They are so underappreciated. Excuse me, I got a phone call. There's a lady calling me from Ohio. Yes, ma'am. Pentecostals? Yes. You have 4 plumbers, 3 electricians, handyman. Okay, what weeks would you like to come? August 14th to the 19th? Great. Yes, ma'am, there'll be Lutherans there. Hello? Hello? And my secretary said, hell, she called me an hour ago and hung up twice. You need to learn to check your religion at the door. When you become the volunteer coordinator, you need to make sure that all religious organizations come and you pray together. And that's it. You don't go out to a volunteer's house and have them practice catechism before you'll bring your crew in, because I've seen that happen. Unfortunately, religion is a wonderful thing. Unfortunately, it has caused a lot of wars in our time. And it wasn't going to create World War III in Greensburg, by God, or you can pack up and go home. And I'm a good Catholic kid. I'm not supposed to tell that to a preacher man from some church from XYZ. But that's what it has to be. It has to be really working together. It has to be something that you have to understand that, yes, we're going to help this lady, we're going to help this family, we're going to help build their home. And even though if they ask me to rake the yard for the 19th time, if that's the work that they're asking me to do, that's what I need to do. Real quick story. I ended up working with AmeriCorps for a couple of years after my 3 years of being the volunteer coordinator. And so they sent me around to disaster sites around the country. There was a very high-profile person with AmeriCorps, and I was asked to be put in charge of this core group of about 9 AmeriCorps people. And I said, but there's other people above me, and the big person said, no, you're taking these people in, you've got the experience, they've never been to a disaster before, you're going to be in charge of them. I said, as long as nobody breaks a leg, we're going to be fine. Well, there was somebody hell-bent for election, they were going to go on a roof and start repairing a roof. And that person was told, no, you're going to clean out the concession stand at the little kid's ball diamond. And that person got a little angry with me. And they said, well, we came here to help. And I said, you're going to help more than any roof project you'll ever do in your life. Because I said, there's a t-ball game at 5 o'clock tonight. And they're bringing in all the kids. And they, even though they lost their homes, you're going to have a t-ball game. And I think that person learned a valuable lesson. So, whatever you guys end up doing as far as putting together a volunteer program, you realize that these people are going to start knocking on your door real quick, real fast. It's okay to tell them, hey, we got your name, we got your number, you're going to have to give us a couple of weeks here to get things organized. We got a lot of things that we got to evaluate where we're going to house you first. We're going to evaluate how we're going to feed you. And we have to have very honest, good work for you so that you have a good experience. Because if you come into our community and have a bad experience, you're going to take that bad experience and take it somewhere else. And we don't want that. We want to be the best damn disaster you ever went to. Damn it. Now go pound some nails. Probably one of the most important things that I ended up doing is I was hanging on to my dog. Is my time about up?
2 minutes.
Okay. I took my dog to work with me every day. I was hanging on to my Dalmatian when the house got sucked off of us. She wouldn't get 15 feet away from me until the day I put her down. I came out of the basement with 5 things. My mom, the clothes on my back, the love for my neighbor, my dog, and my faith in God. So I wrote a book called Molly and the Tornado. And it's our true story of going through the Greensburg tornado in a 3-year time frame in 28 pages. And I put storm safety tips in the back of the book so that no kid would ever be left alone. I'm not here marketing my book. I do a lot of public speaking around the country with book signings. Come see me when you guys get done here if you feel like you really want to talk, or you can actually Google Tampa Bay Times, Molly and the Tornado, and you can read the front page article. I thank you very much. If you've ever done anything to help someone else in your life, if you haven't, you need to start doing it because it's really kind of fun. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt. Appreciate your time. If you pass off the mic to Bruce here. Like I said, we're going to go in chronological order. He already told me he wanted to go after Amanda, but I told him no.
I should absolutely go after
I'm going to pull rank on him. If you don't know Bruce Bailey, you're going to know that he loves to talk. And so we want to limit him to the extent that we can. But he is a wealth of information. He has like a ton of slides in his PowerPoint presentation, which will be available for you at the back of the door as you leave. Just, again, a ton of good stuff, but I think our volunteer effort probably starts when AmeriCorps arrived on the scene. So I see Amanda's nod. You know, I'm going to forego the normal decorum and ask for ladies to go first. And Bruce, you're up, brother. So here's the clicker, and get after it. Thank you.
I don't know whether I can multitask. You're gonna help me. We're partners from the beginning anyway. So just quickly, we've heard about a lot of the things that were unfortunate in various aspects of the tragedy, but there were some very fortuitous things that happened. And I want to focus in on some of those because some of the fortuitous things that we were able to take advantage of, you're able to go home and get going back home right away. On the night of the tornado, many people who are in this room and others from all over the country were gathering in Kansas City for a week-long national meeting on disaster response and recovery. And I actually had driven from St. Louis. I had just showed up at a barbecue in somebody's backyard. Somebody said, you know, we had some sort of tornado that happened in Joplin. This was a FEMA employee's house, but nobody had any idea what had happened here. You know, there was no communication. But I was able to get in my car and head this direction. So I got here, my frame of reference starts at about 9 o'clock on that Sunday evening. Okay, yeah. Okay, so when I was driving down, Missouri was facing several other disasters that were underway, epic flooding in southeastern Missouri. We had a tornado, the Good Friday tornado that closed the St. Louis airport for a week and did serious damage to about 700 homes. And we had pulled together a task force of about 60 people from all over the United States. And on the way down to Joplin, I put a call back to St. Louis and I said, this is an all-hands response. We need everybody. And we need several waves. I need 20 people headed this way immediately. Those people got here at 2:30 in the morning, you know, that next morning, on Monday morning. Okay. And then by the middle of the next day, we had a total of 60 people here. One point that I want to mention very quickly is if you have 211 in your state, and you're not connected with them in terms of information and referral and getting public messaging out, that's one of the first things you need to do when you go home. They're a tremendous resource. We put people up in the St. Louis 211 office very early the next morning to stand up a website and to be able to answer, thousands of incoming calls. And the message just was, if you need help or want to help, call 211. And that was our initial bridge for communication. When I got here, and this is another important point that I would make, and you've heard this over and over again, I can't overestimate the importance of relationships. When I got to Joplin, I had worked with the emergency manager here previously on an ice storm and another tornado. The incident commander from the incident support team who was helping Joplin, and they were just getting together in the basement of the police department, knew me, and he took me aside and he said, by tomorrow morning at dawn, here's what you have on your plate. And this is at about 11 o'clock on Sunday night. So our first task was trying to support the Red Cross to get shelter open, around the corner here in the gymnasium, a 500-person shelter. The 911 system here in Joplin was collapsing because of an overload. Thousands of people were calling, trying to find missing loved ones. There was obviously search and rescue, helping neighbor going on in the community. We knew that people were going to come. We know that people are going to come after an event like this the same way clothes come, in hundreds and thousands of trailer trucks at a time, whether you ask for it or not. We knew that they were going to come, and we had to have a way to deal with it. And we needed a place to deal with donations and critical supplies right away. What I would say, the next important thing is I would ask you to look around right now in your travels throughout this building. The next thing that I would do, if you don't have this already in your plan, when you go home, I'd look for a place just like this that you can go to tomorrow. Not later, because later may be too late. The Red Cross signed an agreement with this university about 10 days before this storm to utilize the facility. When I got here, nobody would have known me from Adam. But because I was affiliated with the Red Cross and had a good relationship with them, basically they opened up the facility to me, and anything that I needed to help accomplish these tasks were provided. They called in their IT people at 2 o'clock in the morning. By 6 in the morning, I had, in this very room, 6 functioning phone lines. This became our missing persons hotline, right where you're sitting right now, by dawn the next morning. So these relationships are vital, and that's why having co-ads and meeting and planning in advance are so critical. And all this during an epic disaster really needs to support the underpinnings of local community leadership. My job when we got here was to provide surge capacity. We're a guest in somebody else's community, and to do what we can to help them accomplish what they want to have done. And very simply, our process, wherever we go, is just this simple. We have agency and government needs, public works, they need help cleaning critical streets. We have homeowner needs, they have to be able to get out of the house, or they're trapped in their house, they need to get out, or there's a tree through their roof and it needs to be tarped. And then we have this tremendous influx of donated resources and volunteer resources, and we need a way to match, the need with the resources. So we have volunteers, hundreds, thousands, individuals, okay? We have groups, the Kansas City Chiefs. The point that I want to make is whenever we have a big epic disaster or a small disaster, it's really important that we're all on the same page. And you need to be affiliated. And there are different ways to describe affiliation, but affiliation doesn't mean that you just have previous training and are part of an organization that has some disaster experience. Affiliation for our purposes means that when you show up at the disaster scene, whoever you're affiliated with is affiliated with a local emergency management system and the coordinating structure that exists. So emergency management, the co-ad that may pre-exist in the community, that's critically important. One of the first things we did, by the way, is we had an all-hands meeting. It might have happened the next afternoon or certainly by Tuesday. where every player, regardless of where they came from in the United States and whatever denomination or faith-based group they were part of in the local community, local government, state agency representatives, we all had an all-hands meeting downstairs where we just had lunch, just so everybody could share who they were, where they're from, what their capabilities were, where they were operating from logistically, so that people could begin to form a rapport with one another. We used a volunteer reception center to provide this matching function in the initial part of the disaster, and that happened. Each of you who walked through the front door of this building followed the same pathway that tens of thousands of volunteers in the ensuing weeks followed coming into this building. Everybody was screened. We matched people in terms of their capabilities and how they were prepared with the types of opportunities that existed in the community. People were referred to support the Red Cross, the Salvation Army, helping to open a pet shelter, sorting donations at the donations warehouse. And then we had a large number of people that needed leadership to be able to be out in the community. So AmeriCorps provided trained leaders to work with 10 or 12 or 14, could be strangers, to keep them safe and to help keep the survivors that they're trying to help safe. And we used that approach from the very beginning. Some of the challenges was needing to ramp up and get all this done in the middle of a Sunday night. We had large numbers of spontaneous volunteers, 400 people before it ever got light. By the middle of the morning, 1,500 people, and later that day we had several thousand people downstairs in the lunchroom that we were trying to deal with all at the same time. The first weekend, as Sam mentioned, Memorial Day, that Saturday we had 3,000 people in the field providing services to Joplin survivors. Communications, you've heard this many different times, was a consistent problem for all of us. In my situation, just personally, something that I learned, there is way too much on my plate for me to be able to do. So I basically focused on relationships with government, organizations, the faith-based community, and I had another woman, a very strong leader, who was our operational leader, Gwen Gardner, who developed our work plan every day in terms of how we were going to utilize volunteers. One of the best things that ever happened to me, and this goes back to relationships when I couldn't talk to anybody and people couldn't talk to me, particularly outside of Joplin. The next day I had a Winnebago, a fire department command vehicle show up, and I thought they were lost trying to find their way to the fire chief. And they came up and introduced themselves, and I asked where they were trying to get to, and they said, we're right where we're supposed to be. We're here for you. All we're going to do is be with you to make sure that you guys can communicate the way you need to. And they stayed here for several weeks.
City of Rolla.
City of Rolla Fire Department. We had these other critical issues, life safety. You've seen the pictures of the debris field. We had, gas, all sorts of sharp debris. Something we didn't think about initially when we start talking about putting people out in the community who are just tremendously motivated to do good. What are we going to do to protect those people during the next storm? We have 3,000 people spread across a 6-mile, debris field, and all the warning systems aren't currently, haven't been fixed yet. How are we going to manage that if we have to evacuate those people quickly and get on top of that? So all these things had to be planned for, and we didn't think of them just that very first night. But now these are things you can think about. And the other thing is, how are we going to protect survivors in particular from looting wasn't that big a problem, but being taken advantage of, or disaster tourism that can happen, in events like this. We set up a system that we were able to put into place immediately with tremendous resources from the city, Head Start, I can't even remember, the school system. We bused everybody out into the community, and they were going out to a drop point. They were unloaded, they were supervised, they received a safety briefing. We had EMTs out there. They had no idea where they were because nobody knew where they were, what streets or what, but they knew how to get back to be picked up and to come back here to the student center. And that gave us control of the the area. I'm not going to dwell on this a lot, but in that earlier slide I showed you, in addition to dealing with volunteers, we also opened a homeowner intake center here. People came in and they were processed downstairs in a separate area who had urgent, critical needs. Not so much dealing with the big debris issues initially, but things they needed help with just right away. And we tried to schedule volunteers and leadership to deal with those things.
All right, Bruce, I'm going to ask you to speed it up a little bit more,
Yeah,
brother.
yeah, okay.
Thank you.
You can see this on the handout. You'll be able to take this with you. These are all the various types of functions that had to occur in the initial VRC. We were here until summer school had opened. We moved across the street, developed a tent village at Missouri Southern Stadium, and then we operated there right until before the first football game. We use the ICS system that many of you are familiar with, and this is just an example of all the different functions and people we had assigned to support this big volunteer operation. We talked about MSSU. This was a tent village. We added a medical unit. We also added areas to stage heavy equipment, track hoes, bulldozers, dump trucks, so that we could dispatch those donated items out to support the heavy debris removal projects that we had going. PPE, everybody was issued with PPE, safety equipment. We had donated food, more food than anybody could eat, probably, some of it's probably still in storage somewhere. Okay. Eventually, after when we got into the fall, we moved into a building, an old daycare center that the city had, and we continued to operate a recovery center. Really, kind of just up to the time that Rebuild Joplin really began to come online and take responsibility for volunteers. Over the longer term, we were supporting the initial efforts of the Long-Term Recovery Committee. That was kind of our last phase. We were here through Christmas of 2012. So in the first year, these are just preliminary numbers, about 75,000 volunteers, over 500,000 hours, over 2,000 volunteer groups that were engaged. We had over 3,000 homeowner requests for assistance, and we were able to clear about 2,900 of those in the first year. All this led now from the beginning to about where we are today, maybe 180,000 volunteers, 1.5 million hours of service to support the resiliency of Joplin. We had just under 500 AmeriCorps members here, and they alone contributed about 130,000 hours helping with the rebuilding recovery effort. And then you've heard this figure, the importance of all this being able to be used also as a contribution to Joplin against the FEMA commitment. So
I'm going to ask you to skip this slide, and we'll come back and cover some of that with the final question that I've got for you guys. So the lesson here is, if you don't know who your AmeriCorps group is in your community, find out quickly, because they know their stuff. They know what they're doing. A tremendously valuable resource for Joplin. So thank you, sir. Appreciate that. Sorry I had to rush you along, but Amanda, as Bruce mentioned, there was a transition phase between AmeriCorps being our lead volunteer agency in terms of coordination to Rebuild Joplin when it came to actually putting people back in homes. So Amanda, thank you for that.
Yeah, thank you. And I couldn't stress more, the importance of the partnerships that you can have in your community with other volunteer organizations, other churches, places that are also managing volunteers, just to have that open line of communication between those. If there's a long-term recovery committee that is set up, have a volunteer subcommittee just to get all of those leaders to come together and just share updates on what's going on, what challenges you're experiencing, how you can work together, not operating in silos, but reaching across and making sure everybody's helping each other. Because it is challenging. The volunteers come streaming in, and I have to say, I was born and raised in Joplin, and I just felt the call to do more in my community after the disaster happened on May 22nd. And this, being a volunteer manager for Rebuild Joplin, was, I think, the hardest job I've ever had in my life. I didn't realize that you would be at the beck and call of volunteers almost 24/7. And that's something that you need to think about, if you want to place those boundaries with the groups that you work with. I was always very concerned about communicating and sharing and trying to make sure our groups were prepared. But that's one thing that I learned that I kind of had to work on as the time went by. The one thing that I really wanted to stress with what I shared with you today, I wanted to give you tools for your toolkit. And one excellent tool that was created as a result of the May 22nd tornado here in Joplin was a disaster recovery playbook. And if there's anything that you just write down today, is just that website, disasterrecoveryplaybook.org. And if this was created with the St. Bernard Project and Farmers Insurance, and you may not know, but Rebuild Joplin was initially started as a website connecting people with needs with volunteers and people who wanted to give. And so after a period of time, that website wasn't being used as much. It was a great resource in the beginning. But then the founders of Rebuild Joplin determined that we need to do something different to really meet the needs of the community longer term. And so we focused our efforts on residential recovery, helping people rebuild their homes or repair their homes who were uninsured or underinsured, that just didn't have any other resources and ways to get things done. And so St. Bernard Project was our partner in that. We were their first full affiliate. St. Bernard Project is out of New Orleans, Louisiana, and out of the St. Bernard Parish. And they actually came together to work with us to share with us what they learned after Hurricane Katrina in 2005. They started their organization in 2006 and had a lot of success with helping clients get back into homes. And so this playbook came as a result of a partnership with Rebuild Joplin, St. Bernard Project, and Farmers Insurance. Farmers Insurance actually had invested a lot of finances and volunteer effort into different projects that Rebuild Joplin had, also St. Bernard Project, because they felt the need to do more and make an impact in our community and have something for the future. And so this playbook covers so much more than what I just wanted to share with you today in these brief slides. There's client services, there's how to set up your disaster recovery efforts and all of that. But there's a whole section on volunteer and kind of managing volunteers. So that's what I wanted to talk about with you today. The themes and values that were established as part of Rebuild Joplin and St. Bernard Project with handling volunteers, one of them was consistency. Just doing the same thing for the different groups that come in and out, and making sure that you're giving your best for every group, no matter what size or who they were. Also, making sure you share a deep appreciation and a meaningful experience with all of the volunteers. Volunteers need to be told thank you by multiple people, multiple times while they're here with us, because we couldn't honestly do it without their help. And so that's something that's really important. Volunteers also need an emotional engagement. So whenever we would have volunteers with us at Rebuild Joplin, we would share a client bio of the house that they were working on and share that in part of our volunteer orientation. We would also invite the client of the homeowner that they were working for to come out and visit them while they're working on their house and just kind of get them to know them a little bit better. And so maybe they also developed a good relationship with the site supervisor who was there kind of monitoring their work and making sure they were doing a good job. And then the other main piece also that needed to be taken care of is just recording good data and capturing those volunteer hours, like what Bruce was talking about, is so important for multiple reasons. Rebuild Joplin alone had 86 AmeriCorps members come through the organization. We worked with a total of 24,737 volunteers, which accumulated to 195,000 plus hours. And we had a total number of projects that we completed was 181. So that's 181 homes that were repaired or built from the ground up. And so we accomplished a lot in a few years. And so Rebuild Joplin actually closed their doors in 2014, just because they felt at that point in time we did all that we could for the community and the needs weren't as great. And so that was a really good thing to be able to do that. So I wanted to talk about different goals of a volunteer department. You want to maximize your engagement, empower your volunteers to donate or fundraise before, during, and after their trip. it's not a bad idea just to open that dialogue about fundraising with volunteers. This is something that they can do. They can, even if they wanted to, pay $10 per person to just take part in, their volunteer efforts. Or they have a variety of suggested ways to fundraise with them that they could do back home. And then we can also make sure we're meeting the workforce demand of the construction department. Making sure you have the right number of volunteers at the site at the right times, doing the right things. And that's something that's kind of challenging to keep track of, but if you're working closely with your construction managers and sharing with them the volunteers that you have, there's ways to kind of make sure you're keeping track of all that. And then providing a meaningful experience to volunteers. I have to say, I had a big challenge with this because we had so many volunteers that came to Joplin. And a lot of them came through AmeriCorps too, and we worked a lot together. And we were instructed not to turn any volunteer away. And that's hard. That's really hard. And so if I have any recommendation today is know your capacity and know what people, know that the job that you have for them to do is something that they will have a meaningful experience with. It'll make them go home and talk about the needs of the community and plan their next trip to come back and see you. That's just so important. Some common barriers and stumbling blocks that have occurred is sometimes the needs of the volunteer group conflict with the needs of the organization. So the best way to kind of mitigate that is to make sure that you have managing expectations with your incoming groups, communicating well with them, what they can expect to have, what kind of tasks they'll be doing. We talked about being over or under capacity. Under capacity is something that happens too. So you have to go out and recruit some local groups at times to make sure, or call back some groups that volunteered before and try to make plans with them to come back. Lack of predictability. One thing that is for sure is all good plans will change. They will change. And so just making sure you're reinforcing with the volunteers that there's a need to be flexible and there's definitely work to do. And just make sure that you're going out there with a good attitude and a servant's heart and making sure we get what needs to be done. So, and then another barrier or stumbling block would be having an unfulfilling experience. So that's something that we don't want to have happen. So communication and making sure that you are, that two-way communication is very important. So getting that feedback from the people that are on the site, doing some on-site evaluations and kind of addressing situations when they occur. One of the things I love about Rebuild Joplin and the St. Bernard Project is processes. And so this is a process for contacting volunteers and a timeline. So before the trip, they kind of lay out all the different steps of what should be happening in terms of volunteer engagement. So the volunteer signs up online on our website. A volunteer coordinator calls the group within 48 hours. We provide links for them to complete their waivers online. And then what they used as well was actually what salespeople use. It's an internet program called Salesforce. And we basically treat the volunteers like clients that we're trying to keep and retain. And so we would use this to schedule out our 60-day calls and then conduct 60, 30, 14, and 7-day contact calls just to make sure that they're on board, they're on track, they're ready, their questions are answered. So communication is key. During the trip, we conduct an orientation per checklist, provide client bio, and send the team to the site. On the last day, we conduct a next step meeting and a survey with them. And all of these forms and all of this checklist, they're actually on the website. You're able to get them there. So it's a great resource. The next step meeting is something that I think is particularly useful. That's where you're collecting each individual volunteer's information and how they want to help moving forward. And so you can keep that and be back in touch with them. And then after the trip, we want to send thank you cards and call them 30 days after they leave us, just to make sure they had a good experience and make them make sure that they know that the need is still there. We'd love to have them back. So for maximizing and managing volunteers, it's so important to do on-site volunteer troubleshooting, keep that communication going. Maintain updated future volunteer numbers, track that volunteer data, make sure those waivers are completed, express your appreciation and highlight your unmet needs. And it's maybe a little bit challenging sometimes, but have an open funding dialogue with your volunteers. and then know that you may need to go out and do some recruiting. So these documents that I kind of mentioned while I spoke, like I said, they're all available on that website. Those are templates. You can make them your own and just kind of run with it and see what you can do. And so those are my contact information if you'd like more information. So.
Thank you very much. Marty, take us home, sir.
Okay. How much time we have left?
We have 20 minutes.
Okay, I'll be quick. No PowerPoint. I want to just keep this a little more conversational. I've done PowerPoints to death in a past life, and so I just want to just talk and tell you our story a little bit. How many, just to get to know the audience a little bit here, I'm sure some of you are with local or state governments, that type of thing. You've got some that are faith-based groups, or perhaps you're with a volunteer organization. How many here are with a faith-based group? Okay, good. A lot of what I'm going to talk about is for you. And if you are here with another organization, or you're here with a city, municipality, or a state, or whatever, I hope I share some things with you that will be productive in the event that you have a disaster in your community that you can share with church leaders. As Sam said, my name is Marty Knight. I'm with, I had a couple of roles in the tornadoes that struck Bologna, Arkansas in 2011 and 2014. One of those was I am a local church leader with a church that was planted in Bologna in 2007 by a group of 9 families, and has grown to about 150 or 200 in membership today. We spent a lot of time early on praying and considering and asking the question, where does God want us in town? Physically, where did he want the building? And there was a lot of debate. And we chose a site that was a little more out of the way than we had originally envisioned. But the other sites that we looked at were right in the path of both an EF2 tornado and an EF4. April 25th, 2011, an EF2 tornado struck Bologna. One of the widest, ironically, about 1.75 miles wide. It was just not, what the National Weather Service told us was that it just never settled on the ground quite enough to, otherwise we'd have been in a lot of trouble. My home was in the path of that storm. We had to move out of my house and do a lot of repair work, and that's what you saw a lot in the 2011 storm. The 2014 storm, there was a lot of debate about whether or not that was an EF5 or an EF4. They finally settled on a high-end EF4 because the construction standards in Bologna were not quite what they needed to be in order to declare that an EF5. The second storm was on the ground for 56 miles, 26 and a half of which was in Faulkner County, my home county where I grew up and was raised. And the 4.5 mile section through Bologna was the section that was the most powerful. The portion of the storm was rated EF5, or could have been rated EF5. We were able in 2011 to kind of figure some things out. We had cash donations that came in, and I'm going to talk about that a little bit later. We had a church organization that, one primarily from Nashville, Tennessee, that worked closely with us in providing a lot of supplies, and we were able to distribute those. And then, as you can expect in a town of 4,000, 30 miles north of Little Rock, chainsaws and rednecks showed up like you would not believe, and they were there to help, and they did a great job. And in 2014, 2011 had got us ready for what we saw in 2014. It was a massive storm. There were 4 killed in 2011, 9 killed in Bologna in 2014. And so I want to just share with you some things that we learned over the course of both of those storms. And a lot of it's been said, and I won't repeat a lot of it. By the way, Matt, I've never heard anybody ask a faith-based group if anybody's ever on the bar. That was a good question. I like it.
I was raised Catholic. Works for you.
Just some fun with Matt. I hope nobody's offended by it. Us having a little fun there. Some things that I wanted to share with you that we learned, and I won't touch on a lot of what's already happened, but one is this: coordinate your activities with the cities. Make sure that you touch base with the city. You know what's going on around you. In the 2014 storm, we had a group. The churches got together, and it was largely. You can imagine a city of 4,000. We don't have the resources that a Joplin or a Tuscaloosa has. We're closer to what you guys experienced in Greensburg and Filter, Nebraska, and so forth. The city government was totally overwhelmed with just response, just figuring out who we lost and who was in hospitals and where they were and all that kind of stuff. The churches really stepped in and said who's got what and who's going to coordinate volunteers. And I will say this: in 2014 in Faulkner County, I saw a gentleman back there with a Team Rubicon shirt on. They came in a little bit later and did a magnificent job of coordinating our volunteers. I don't know if you were in Conway or Bologna,
I wasn't.
but they did a fabulous job, and the county government kind of set that up. And so the church groups really took the lead in figuring some of that out early on. We had one church that handled clothing, one church that handled food, one church that handled the volunteer registration and working with FEMA and tracking all of that. And it's just a thing of beauty. Check the competition. I'll echo what Matt said. We had a church group come in, a different religious group. They came in with the largest 2 pieces of plywood I've ever seen in my life. They were 6 foot wide and 14 feet tall, I think, and had their name on it, and they propped it up against our sign. And some of our folks are saying, "Really?" And so we went out and said, "Look, people need to know where our church is because they're being told to come here for certain things. So we need you to take your sign down." And we instantly saw a fence. And I said, "But we have some of our members back here that are going to help you build some frames up so that we can set those signs up because there is no competition here. We're here doing what God wants us to do, what the Lord wants us to do." And so, we made sure they weren't offended by that at all. Make sure you get the right people at the right place, doing the right work. We had a church member, and he'd be highly embarrassed if he knew that I was talking about him. If you know Sam Elliott, the actor, the old cowboy actor, Nathan is a firefighter in North Little Rock, and he is like, I tell him all the time, I think he's Sam Elliott's son. He's got that same gruff behavior, just get it done. And I walked in on the first day after the 14 storm. We kind of, the church leadership just called everybody and said, "We're getting the band back together." The old Blues Brothers reference. Same thing. Everybody at the building tomorrow at 6 o'clock. And the storm had left town at 7:30 on Sunday evening. First thing I saw was they had Nathan out there on the front line handing supplies out and meeting people that had lost everything. And I said, "Guys, he's just going to tell them rub some dirt on it, figuratively. He's not your guy to have out there. Get him with it. I mean, he knows his stuff. He knows how to deal with this kind of stuff. Get him out there working with people that are handling chainsaws and digging things out and all that kind of stuff. And so make sure you get the right people in the right place because that's really critical. Last thing I'll mention, manage your resources based on your need. There was a lot of talk earlier today about each disaster being local, each one being unique. We're a little rural community outside Little Rock. With that has different challenges than a city of 60,000 or 150,000 or larger. Manage those resources. Know what you're capable of. We spent a lot of time talking about that. We had a large church that I have a good relationship with in Little Rock, and I called them and said, "People need plastic tubs." because they're going out through the fields and they're picking up things that are valuable to them, family pictures and that kind of thing, and they need tubs to put it in because they can't get it anywhere right now. They just need it out of the weather. And I got a call back a little bit later and they said, we got 2 tractor trailer loads with 75,000 plastic tubs coming. I said, okay, first things first, can you stop one of them? And they said, yeah. And really what that represented was a church with a lot of resource. Saying, okay, they need tubs, and we'll get them a lot. And it was partly my fault because they said, how many do you need? I said, a lot. The other thing that I'll mention is this, and I'll close with this. We had $150,000 of cash come in 2011, and we worked on a process where our church members went out and met people and found out what their needs were. And we repeated that in 2014. There was $375,000 in cash from individuals and churches from Washington to Florida and Maine to California that came in, and they said, spend this like you see fit. The first thing we did is we paid for 9 burials. One of them is one of our members. And we took care of that. We wanted to make sure those families were taken care of first. And then we sent our folks out. And if you want to wait, if you're with a faith-based organization and you want to wait for your people to get out and be involved in the lives of other folks and meet them and connect with them, I can't think of a better way. Really what you're doing is you're sending them out there and saying, connect with somebody. We had people that they would never dream of getting involved with a religious discussion with their neighbor, but one guy worked tirelessly. He'd get off work, come to the church, get a stack of papers, and go out, forms for people to fill out, and go out, and he'd come back at midnight with them complete. And he connected with so many people in the community. I know I didn't talk about a lot of the logistics of how that all works. I wanted to really connect on the faith-based side because the churches they're a powerful tool in this kind of situation, and a lot of times they'll engage to levels that they never have in the community in the past. And so I'm out of soap.
That's a good note to end on. So, we have a few minutes for questions. Anybody have any nuts and bolts types of questions on working with volunteers? We'd be happy to answer some. In the back.
How did you work with the city's Emergency Operations Center and Incident Command System in managing the needs of volunteers and having them understand what the real situation was?
In Joplin's case, we met daily. We had an operational briefing even before it got first light, and each of us had a chance, to talk about the status of our operations, hear about problems that maybe other parts of the operation knew about, where corrections were needed, that type of thing. And in-house, we had a similar situation here, where we had a morning briefing, all hands briefing, before we went out in the field, and just importantly, we had a debriefing at the end of the day to figure out what had to be changed for the next operational period.
And I'll follow that up. The first time I met Bruce and Quinn and Chad Angel with AmeriCorps, I was down in the EOC at City Hall, and I'd heard that there were long lines of volunteers out at the campus in Missouri Southern, and I'd had a little bit of a volunteer experience in the previous city that I'd worked in. And so the city manager at the time said, hey, you've worked with volunteers before, right? I said, yes, sir. He said, go up to Missouri Southern and there's an issue. We need to get volunteers down in the area quicker. So I'm like, okay, where's Missouri Southern? I'd only been in Joplin for 6 weeks. So just find it, ask somebody. So I got up there, and the first thing I saw was a guy in a ZZ Top beard. I'm not kidding you. Guy by the name of Chad, sitting in one of the little Head Start buses with a clipboard and a line of probably 300 people behind him. So I walked up and tapped him on the shoulder and said, you don't know me, what's going on here? He's like, well, we're trying to get volunteers on the bus. It's taken an hour and a half to get people down to the drop points that Bruce's team had set up. I said, so what do you need from me? You don't know me from anybody. He's like, some larger buses would be nice. So having been the assistant city manager, I called up our transportation coordinator and said, hey, school had just announced that they weren't going to have classes for the rest of the year. I called Robert, our transportation coordinator, and said, who do you know over at the bus barn at Joplin Schools? I can get some buses in here. He's like, how many do you need? I said, give me as many as you get, as many as you can. Yeah, be very careful with the words that you use, because no kidding, probably within a half hour, we had 15, 20 school buses and drivers just pulling up into the little U-shape, the horseshoe here, and just quick. So again, Bruce touched on it. You've heard it throughout the conference, the relationships of the people that you know in the community. You know, who are the people in your neighborhood? The old Sesame Street song is key, because if you know who those people are, you can put people in touch with the right resources they need. One other website reference, and I'll get to your question. On our website at joplinmo.org, if you go into the search box and just type Joplin Pays It Forward, we have essays from myself, former city manager, I think Bruce is in there too, just several people who had worked in the volunteer effort or in just the disaster recovery effort from their perspectives. I would ask you to take that home, because there's probably an essay from somebody who's in a position that you're in, but you know, whether it's a school administrator, just some kind of information that would be helpful, along with the recovery playbook that Amanda mentioned. Just good resources out there for you guys to tap into. So, yes, ma'am.
One thing I'll mention is it relates to keeping in touch and communication. We used extensively in Bologna, in both storms, was social media. And we set up Facebook pages for the church points of contact. We all used that page exclusively, made it private. It was really, all it was for was to help us stay in touch with each other. And it was extremely effective, because if you're texting, you're inevitably going to forget someone, or you're not going to have someone's